Looks like it's just a minute till everything started, but I just wanted to check in those that are already here. Make sure you're able to access the captions. You're able to view the interpreters if you're using them. Able to hear everyone. Just go ahead and put something in the chat. We can pause at any moment if someone's not able to access anything, and I'm going to have Amy put that in the chat as well to make sure in case anyone can't access any of the accommodations tonight. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate you joining. And before I want to just kind of touch on a few things, but I just want to introduce myself. My name is Angelica Dill. I'm one of the co-founders of Adjacent Space. There's another one who's not with us tonight, but he's going to be with us in the series upcoming. We have 3 more sessions after tonight that we hope you can join as well. We'll introduce Ed Zwilling, who's on the call, Alex Tenney, and Beth Dorset in the session tonight in a moment. I'll let them introduce themselves. But first, we're going to take a quick poll. We just want to see who's here so far. Want to see who's in the audience. Let's see if we can get that poll going. I don't know if you're able to see it. Amy, do you have that going on? Oh, there we go. And you can move it around. I want to make sure everyone can see the interpreter as well. So we just want to ask who you are, who's in the audience right now. HR, maybe you're deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind, maybe a family member, maybe you own a business. And we also want to know if you're from Alabama or if you're from out of state. All right. Are we able to share any of the poll answers so far? If that's working or not. Okay, we have a question about accessibility, so I just want to pause for a second. They asked if there's any way they can pin the interpreter to see bigger and clearer. Yeah, you definitely can. We're going to be going between a few different people. So I think maybe once I'm off the screen or not talking anymore, maybe I'll take myself off the screen so you can see better. But there's going to be several people talking. Ed will be speaking the most. So if you wanted to pin one of the interpreters for Ed, that might be helpful, or we're open to other recommendations as well. We're very flexible. And we lost Ed. I'm not sure what's going on there. We want to make sure he's back on the call. So give us just 1 second. Looks like he might still be connected, but I want to make sure before we proceed, he's all good. Looks like he just got reconnected, so we're all good. Well, I'll just go ahead and continue. Adjacent Space is a nonprofit. We're based out of Birmingham, Alabama, and our mission is to seek equity and accessibility through various forms of action. Hi, Ed. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you. I don't know that he sees that he's
There we go. I was just saying my Zoom had updated itself spontaneously, which just,
of course, right. Well, better now than later. That's okay. Right. I was just talking about who Adjacent Space is and just talking about how we approach different forms of action. We try to reactively respond to some advocacy needs. Sometimes there's some discrimination that happens and we try to advocate in those scenarios. But if we can, we also look for ways to be proactive due to patterns that we see throughout our community. Oh, and we have the answers here. Very cool. Awesome. Thank you for responding to the poll. But we do the different ways that we're proactive. We do that through evenings like this, where we do try to educate our community, not just the deaf community. It's important for them to know their rights, but also the community at large, so they understand what they're responsible for. And we're all a part of this community. We all have different pieces and different roles we have to fill. We also try to model accessibility. I don't know if you've seen our social media or looked at our website. We've been working really hard to figure out ways on our website specifically that when you open it up, that you see both something in ASL and in English. And we're looking to not make sure it's just interpreted, but it's all just equal throughout the website. It does make it tough because of some of the weird nuances of social media and the web and that sort of thing, but the best that we can, we're trying to figure out how to match that throughout all the content that we produce. We also make sure we have transcripts and captions and IDs and various things like that. So check it out sometime. We've hired deaf individuals like Beth that's on the call right now to produce that content in ASL, and we want to make sure that we're putting it out there and we're modeling it so that other people can see websites like that that are truly accessible. So that's one way we've used some of our grant money and some of our donations, but also for evenings like this where we're producing some educational pieces so we can connect with our community. So with that, I want to recognize some of the grants that we've received throughout our community, also some of the donations from individuals that have sent, random money in, or just however they can support. It's been really awesome to see that and have things like this happen in real time. So thank you so much. At the bottom too, I just want to mention that you'll see there's a place for chat. You're welcome to add comments along the way. There's also a Q&A button. If you have a specific question for us, for Ed, we'll be monitoring that. I also asked Ed just a second ago, we are willing to stay a few minutes after if you want to stay after the session is done and pop up on video if you'd prefer to sign your question, or you can always contact us afterwards as well. And again, please let us know if you don't know how to use the CC. There is a CC button at the bottom. We have a live captionist on the call right now. So before I have Ed, Alex, and Beth introduce themselves, we do want to ask another question to set our thinking in the direction of communication in the workplace. So I want to ask, what makes you feel good about your job? And I'm just talking about you yourself as an individual. Can the poll come up, Amy? See if that pops up. There we go. So the answers are connection with my coworkers. That makes me feel good. Receiving regular feedback about my performance. That would make me feel good. Feeling well trained for my position. Good relationship, good rapport with your boss. Or maybe there's something else that makes you feel really good about your job. Give you just a second to answer that. All right, do we have the answers? See if we're able to share that. Perfect. Very cool. So as we proceed, there's the law, and then there's best practices, and there's also what makes us feel good as humans. And communication is interwoven through everything that we do every day. And that's the center of what we're talking about here. And Ed is going to be speaking on the side of the law, what the law says. Sometimes it's a little restricting. Sometimes, it allows employees to, have the job that they need with accommodation. But just thinking about what makes us feel good as an employee and how we can have good employees and have good companies and all of that, I think is a good mindset to go into information like this. So with that, I'll go ahead and have Alex introduce herself, then Beth, then Ed, and then we'll go into our first question.
I'm Alex Tenney, and I went to the Alabama School for the Deaf.
Hello. Hello, this is Beth Dorset, formerly known as Overland. And so I work in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, mainly. Hello.
My name is Ed Swilling. I'm an attorney here in Birmingham, Alabama. This is my 30th year practicing law. The last, 20 of them have been primarily engaged representing folks with disabilities in federal courts around the country.
You're muted, Angelica.
All right, thank you. Alex, do you want to start with the first question?
Sure. Hello. So, at the beginning of the employment process, you're filling out applications and whatnot, and you may not choose to disclose your disability, which can sometimes be a barrier. Would you say that disclosing your disability can cause a barrier at the onset of the entire application process? And for deaf people, we typically cannot hide that. We need communication resources, or maybe we need a sign language interpreter, so we're not able to hide and not disclose. And unfortunately, it's a very common barrier for many deaf folks. So what can deaf people do? What can they do to request services and also prevent discrimination from occurring?
Well, that's a really broad question, and it's a good question. The ADA doesn't require anyone to disclose their disability. However, there are those people who have the invisible disability who might get away with not disclosing a disability, and then there are other people who have very obvious disabilities. If you show up to an interview in a wheelchair, for example, everybody knows you have a disability, so it can be kind of the elephant in the room if you're not talking about it. But if you require accommodations for the interview process, it may not be possible to not disclose it. I think you almost have to. Now, I have met people who were deaf or hard of hearing that were so good at lip reading and so well with speech that I didn't realize that they had any impairment until I was told, generally because I bob my head a lot when I talk and I make people seasick. But if they're trying to read my lips. But all that said, I found, well, the first thing to understand is that the law only really applies to larger employers. So the ADA, that is the main law that applies here, but not the only one, only applies if you have at least 15 employees. So if you're going to a real small company to apply, they don't have any federal obligation to accommodate a disability if they have less than 15 employees. So that's the first thing to understand. And the bigger the company is, the more likely that you're going to get accommodations that you need, the more likely that they're going to have experience with it. And if you're applying for a government job, especially a federal government job, many times it's advantageous to disclose the fact that you have a disability, because diversity is truly sought after in those jobs, and it may actually give you a leg up. So all that said, that's a personal decision, whether or not you choose to disclose you have a disability. But if you need to have an accommodation, there's a lot of things that you might think about doing. For example, you could request to have your interview via something like this, Zoom, where it could be captioned. And by making that request, if your English language skills are good, that may be all the accommodation that you need. And in the age of the pandemic, that may even make the employer more happy. So to not have you come to the office. But but if you need to have a sign language interpreter, then you're going to probably have to do some educating, unless you are interviewing with a large company or government agency. That's been my experience, is that most small to medium companies don't have a lot of experience with this. So you kind of end up having to be your own advocate and educate your prospective employer. And it's important to be able to do that in a way that doesn't seem combative or entitled. It needs to come from a cooperative place, if that makes sense.
It does. And if you felt that, you had been discriminated against, how would you be able to document that?
That's great. That's a great
accurately?
question. A lot of once you get the job, it's very frequent that a supervisor or co-employee will say or do something, and it's just oral, and there's no documentation of it. And it may be really important to document. So I always, I'm a proponent of telling my clients to send confirming emails. That's a great way to document. I'm just emailing to confirm that you dropped by my cubicle today, and said X, and denied my request for accommodation because you said it was too expensive, or because you said you're grandfathered in and the ADA doesn't apply to you, or whatever nonsense you get. You should do that. Now, in the job interview stage, if you're discriminated against, that is really difficult to enforce the law in that situation. It's really hard to document that stuff, which again, if you did your interview by Zoom, like this is being recorded, you could potentially record it and have on the tape all the inappropriate questions I asked about your disability that had nothing to do with accommodations you needed during the interview or your ability to perform the essential functions of the job.
How wild is it that someone's trying to get a job and then they also are needing to document this? I just need to point that out. That sounds really stressful.
Right, exactly. No, that's true. That's true. But you kind of have to learn to, I guess, pick battles. And the question is if that's the situation that you feel that you're put in when you're interviewing for the job, do you even want to work for that company? But at the end of the day, trying to enforce interview accommodations that were denied is not likely going to result in you getting that job. So is it something that you want to do, and then create a paper trail of being a litigious person? That's very different once you've got your foot in the door and you have to preserve your income to support yourself and your family, and someone is using your disability against you and discriminating against you. At that point, you have no choice. You need to fight for it. But when you're just trying to get your foot in the door, I'm not really sure that that looking to document discrimination during the interview process is in anyone's best interest. But that's the way I would do it. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you very much. That's really great information to think about. The interpreter was muted for a moment there. So have you seen any examples of that kind of discrimination that you've experienced in your years of practice?
In the interview process, I have a good friend who has no arms and no legs, and he works over at the Lakeshore Foundation. At least he used to, and he may just volunteer there now. I think he works somewhere else now, but he's quite the athlete for a guy with no arms and no legs, and he knows that when he shows up for an interview, that people are going to be really surprised and have all kinds of questions, and a lot of the questions are going to be just like obvious things like, well, can you even make a phone call? And so what he told me that he does to try and nip that in the bud is he will go out of his way to prove that he can do all those things even before he has his interview. So after he's applied and they've scheduled an interview, he'll normally call to confirm that he has the interview at a certain time. Then they know, well, he can make a phone call because he just did. And then he may even go by there to drop something off, you know, like, hey, I had this other letter of reference I forgot to attach. And I know my interview is not till, you know, later in the week, but I just wanted to bring this by. And then they know, well, gosh, he can get here at the drop of a hat. It's not that big a deal for him. So in many cases, you kind of have to overcome all of the stigma that may be associated with having a disability, any given disability. And so that's how he does it. That may not work, you know, for you, but you may be able to think about that and come up with something that you could do to help demonstrate, you know, that you're fully capable of performing whatever job it is you're applying for.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
I just want to check if we have any questions from the audience so far. Please. Oh, sorry. Please feel free to ask anything. And go ahead, Beth.
All right. Wow, Ed, thank you for your wisdom in regards to how to get through the interview process. And so moving forward, the next question, we have seen in the newspaper talking about you, Ed, that you are representing a lawsuit against several restaurants in Birmingham who did not follow the ADA. And so those that were interviewed said that they did not have the opportunity to resolve this short of a lawsuit. They stated that they never received a letter. The article goes on to discuss that the individuals who are suing these restaurants felt that since the ADA was established more than 30 years ago, the restaurants should already be aware of their responsibility. And it was extremely uncomfortable, as you can imagine, for this individual to be denied access into restaurants at several locations. So I wanted to ask, in regard to that, how can these companies be better prepared for their deaf interviewees?
Yeah, well, and that's a good question. The thing to keep in mind is that article was about cases that arise under a different title of the ADA, public access. And public access is a much more black and white law. So if, for example, you have your business in an historic downtown building that has a step up off the sidewalk to get into the building, and there's no ramp, it doesn't really matter that your building was built in the 1800s. If there is a way that you can ramp that without much difficulty or expense, and typically there is, then that's it. There's no grandfather clause. You have to do it. And if you haven't, then sooner or later, you're likely to get sued over it. Employment is very different law. First off, there's fewer black and white issues. And what we're dealing with in accommodating someone who's deaf or hard of hearing is generally not an issue of architectural barriers. It can be, you know, fire alarms need to be visual alarms, and if they're not, that's an architectural barrier. But for the most part, it's auxiliary aids and services. It's assistive equipment, whether that's software, assisted listening devices, having ASL interpreters and signed English interpreters and voice interpreters in your Rolodex, so you have those resources available. And like I said, the bigger companies really don't have any excuse to not know that. But and Angelica can vouch that, you know, there are hospitals that still don't do that. and clearly they have to deal with this very, very frequently, much more frequently than even a large company probably would deal with interviewing folks who require those accommodations. So I don't know the answer to your question. I think what we're doing today goes a long way to that, but reaching that target audience is that's the hard part. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the best answer I know to give.
Okay, yes, thank you, Ed. If you don't mind, I want to add a tip also for those who are interviewing deaf individuals. I always encourage, for those who are deaf and will be interviewing, I always recommend that they request accommodations at least 2 weeks prior to the interview. And that way they can allow some time for those accommodations to work. And that works out best for both the interviewer and the interviewee. So that's just a tip to keep in mind, that notice is a benefit. And for those hearing employers, don't be afraid to ask your candidate what type of accommodation works best for you. Don't be afraid to ask that question. We as deaf people love to share the resources and share the accommodations that work for us. So please don't be afraid, and please do ask.
Also, if you go in and you fill out an application, maybe the boss will ask, hey, are you available for an interview tomorrow at 1 o'clock? And that's a little bit last minute. You may feel on the spot, and it would be a good opportunity to sit there, speak with the supervisor or the owner and let them know, can you give me a little bit of time? That way we're able to find an interpreter, because we do have resources in order to locate an interpreter. So maybe the employer would be able to delay the interview process a little bit longer, not have it the next day. Don't be afraid to ask that as well.
Absolutely.
Let me add something onto that, if that's okay. I think it's important too, when you're requesting accommodations, that you're real specific as to what accommodation you're looking for. Because if you just ask for an interpreter, there's so many different types of interpreter. And employers don't necessarily even know that. So they may just default to an ASL interpreter, but if that's not what you need, make sure that you've made your request with some specificity so that you get the accommodation you need.
Right, or maybe there's an app they need to download, right? In place of having a live interpreter, that sort of thing.
Right.
All right, beautifully answered. Okay, our next question. How can they educate themselves, the companies, how can they educate themselves so that the burden of accessibility doesn't solely rest on the deaf person's shoulders? What are some of the resources, and how can they educate themselves to better respond to this?
There are a host of technical assistance manuals, and I think some of them will be attached here or available through this seminar, that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Justice publish, that are free to download, that are guides for businesses and how to accommodate people with disabilities, and in particular, people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And larger companies are going to have a human resources department, and that really falls under the umbrella of what the human resources director is supposed to be bringing to the company. Smaller companies likely aren't going to have a human resources person at all, and those are the ones that are most likely going to present the most difficulties to the applicant. That's where all the education comes in. But with a larger company that has a human resources department, your interview should not be their first rodeo. so hopefully it's not. But being aware of that technical assistance stuff that you can get from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Justice is helpful if you get kind of a blank stare back from the employer when you ask for an accommodation. You can point them towards some of that stuff so they can see that you're just not making stuff up.
I wanted to add, I did add the article that we were referring to in the comments if anyone wanted to read it. I found it
Oh,
about
cool.
a month ago. It's very interesting because it shows the dynamic of a business who very well may not have known these things, and that happens. But on the other side, it showed the conflict of an individual just trying to go to a restaurant and couldn't use the bathroom because it wasn't accessible, which, you know, in this context doesn't apply in the same way, but that
Right.
whole dynamic of, oh, I didn't know. And then this person saying, well, I can't keep going to every business and telling them. I can't constantly be the one educating them. And again, this is part of why we want to do things like this, so
Right.
that education is out there.
But that issue is present in employment too. I mean, I had a client, she's passed away now, but she lived in a small town in Mississippi, and she worked for the Department of Health for her county. And the accommodation they gave her, because there was no accessible bathroom in the health department building that she worked, was to be able to go home whenever she had to use the bathroom. She could just leave and get in her wheelchair van and drive home, which is a major pain to load herself up and lock herself in and drive over there and then redo it all to drive back just to go to the bathroom. And it wasn't until they relocated to a new building that they finally put an accessible bathroom in for her. But that's an example of a request for an accommodation that should have been made. That was a no-brainer.
I would like for every time a business recommends a recommendation like that, for them to all be required to do that.
Okay, the last question related to the businesses. Could you provide other examples where you've seen companies respond in regards to different types of accessibility measures that they've made? Additional examples?
Are you talking like in the context of litigation, or just in the context of employment, or give me some more background on what you're asking?
Sure, in providing accommodations for employees who are deaf.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. Yeah, I'll tell you where I have seen the biggest problem, and this is one of those best practices versus what the law requires kind of issues. And I have seen, this is true even with bigger companies, where they understand that the employee is going to need an ASL interpreter on occasion, won't need it all the time. You know, once the training is over and the employee understands the job, the employee ought to be able to do it. And there may be other accommodations from the day-to-day things, whether it's passing notes or whatever, communicating in some other fashion that the employee is comfortable with. And the employer says, but whenever you need an interpreter, just let us know. If you're not following, we'll get one. And I've seen that happen and it work okay. But you have these benefits and privileges, they call them benefits and privileges, keywords of employment, that goes beyond just having your job and getting the paycheck. It's like maybe social events maybe there's a firm retreat and you go to the beach for a weekend or something, or what have you. You have a social event where you get together, or you have extracurricular activities that you could go to that are not job requirements. They're not the quote essential functions of your job. They're not part of your job description, but it's something that you're entitled to attend because you work for this company and all of your co-employees are going. And so then you request an accommodation for that. And I've seen a lot of companies take the position that they don't have to do that because it has nothing to do with the actual job performance. And unfortunately, I think that there are some jurisdictions, the 11th Circuit is one, where the case law requires the employee to show an actual adverse employment action that was taken against them in order to have a successful outcome in a case for a failure to accommodate. against an employer. Whereas there are other jurisdictions that say the failure to provide the necessary accommodation, even if it doesn't result in a negative or an adverse work action, is enough to support a claim against the employer. And I think that's the problem, is you can end up feeling segregated and less than your co-employees who are hearing when the employer doesn't allow you to partake to the same extent as your co-employees. I think that's the best practice, is to provide the accommodations for those events, but not all employers appear, in my past experience, willing to do that. I hope that made sense.
So I understand what you're saying about the reasonable accommodation and whatnot, but let's say it's a last minute meeting, they're pulling everyone together sort of thing. What would you do in those types of situations?
I think that's where something like VRI could come in handy, video remote interpreting. It is certainly not something that you want to rely on all the time, because it has its own pitfalls. But when it's a last minute emergency thing, I think that's a great resource. It's certainly better than saying, well, we'll let some other co-employee take notes for you. So, I mean, even if you're very, very proficient in written English, you're not in a situation where you can be involved in the meeting. You can't ask questions because you have no idea what's going on until you read the notes, which is, by that time, the meeting's over.
That's true. It is a challenge. It really is. And I absolutely understand that. Now, in regards to equity, and I put a note to myself, so hold on just a moment. Let me grab that. It means that everyone is receiving equal and respectful and defined treatment, right?
Right.
So what would be considered satisfactory regarding equitable employment?
Well, I think that the best practice in the last example, that's an example of equity. You know, hey, we're all going to go bowling after work today, and we're bringing an ASL interpreter so that, you know, Mary Smith can join us because we want her to come bowling too. Then that's equitable. But saying, hey, Mary, you're welcome to join us, but we don't want to spring for the interpreter because we're already spending a lot on the lanes. And you know, you don't really need to talk to anybody, but we'll certainly feed you and let you bowl. That's not equity. But at the end of the day, is that actionable? And I think that's going to vary by jurisdiction. I think in some jurisdictions it might be actionable because the ADA specifically speaks to the benefits and privileges of employment and providing accommodations with respect to those, which I think would include that bowling example. But in our jurisdiction, the courts have said, unless it results in an adverse work action, which would require you to show that, well, gosh, because I didn't go bowling, I didn't get promoted. I don't know how you're going to connect those dots.
You know, I believe, or my dream would be for everyone who, you know, for everyone to just sign, right? So then why don't we pay for all of the employees to learn sign language? They could take classes. I think that would just be really amazing if we could do that, or teach the staff how to properly communicate with different individuals, and they can just incorporate that in their everyday lives.
And it's a lot about attitude, right? I want Beth and Alex to add to this, but a lot of companies I've worked with, there's a lot of negotiation happening, conversation. Hey, what do you think about this or this? And the deaf employee is involved in the process of what they feel is equitable, but also the company then can say, hey, you know, we are trying to work with all of these different pockets and situations. Can we do this and then do this for this situation? And I've seen a lot of times that work well when there's a good relationship. You know, maybe it doesn't always turn out, but for the most part, and again, Alex and Beth, I don't know what your experience has been, but that speaks volumes as well.
Well, the key requirement in the ADA, and quite candidly, most successful employment-related ADA cases I've handled were won because I was able to prove that the employer didn't even bother to engage in an interactive process with the employee. When we get to the employment section, I can maybe explain a little bit better what that means. But when you request an accommodation, the employer isn't necessarily required to always have to provide the specific accommodation that's requested. But the employer can't just ignore it or summarily deny it or give an ultimatum. The employer has to have a dialogue with the employee to find out what it is they need and to explore whether there are other accommodations that might work just as well. And when the employer doesn't do that, that in many cases is all I need to prove to win the case.
Mhm. But let's say you have a company that would consider that as an undue hardship, right? Meaning, okay, we have a certain percentage that we're going to put towards this. What would that look like?
Yeah, you see, the whole undue burden defense to me is not an easy one for employers to prevail on. A lot of employers, I think, look at it from the standpoint, well, if I'm going to have to pay for that, that's an undue burden. And courts are not going to agree. If that's their best argument, well, it was going to cost us money. Tough. That's just part of it. It has to be a significant hardship. So it would have to be a lot of money. So for, example, I was trying to think of an example that I can give. And quite frankly, I've not had a case where people took the position that it was an undue hardship. Generally, I can't think of one where I had it in an employment.
That's shocking to me.
Yeah, because it seems like the easiest out, right? But generally, the cost of adaptive equipment isn't that expensive, and so usually, in my experience, when an employer can accommodate somebody, they typically tend to do that. And when they don't, it's generally they rely on the direct threat language that it would pose a direct threat to the health and safety of the public, other employees, or the employee that's requesting the accommodation. I see that a lot. I see that used a lot. Or they argue that the accommodation requested isn't necessary. You can do your job without that. You might like to have it. You might be more happy in doing your job with it, but you can do it without it. And really the argument that they make is you don't need it. Not we can't afford it, or not that it would be unduly burdensome. They argue that it has nothing to do with the essential functions of your job. Or even with the accommodation, you couldn't perform the essential functions of your job. They make that argument too. For example, I had a police officer who got promoted. I mean, she was really good at her job, but she only had one hand. Her other hand, she had no digits, or they were fused, or I can't remember exactly what the situation was. But it was impossible for her to use a firearm with her non-dominant hand because she couldn't pull the trigger. And so she was able to qualify in all the gun ranges up until that point when she got promoted, just shooting offhand with one hand, not two hands, just one hand, not bracing, just one. But when she got the promotion, in order to get the licensure she needed to have, she had to be able to also shoot with her non-dominant hand, which she requested the accommodation of, hey, let's not make me have to do that because I can't physically do it. And but that was listed as an essential function of that particular law enforcement job. So the employer doesn't have to change the essential functions of the job. But they do have to provide reasonable accommodations that would allow you to do those essential functions. So the ways they get around it can be, yeah, it's too expensive, but usually it's not required for you to do the essential functions of the job. You can do them without it, or you couldn't do the essential functions even if we did this. So that's really where they get you, or it would pose a health and safety risk.
I think Beth had something to add.
Yes, so I'm going to put on a different hat for a minute as an employment specialist.
Yeah.
So we had a situation where the deaf employee and the company were having some disagreements about what type of events or meetings would happen. So basically they said, we've hired you and you already have an interpreter.
You need to bring your own.
And they said that either they didn't know about the accommodations, they didn't know what type of accommodations to provide in this statement that they responded, because they said you already have to bring your own interpreter. And so that was their misunderstanding about how this works. So I had to step up and provide education to let them know that there are options for different types of accessibilities, but the disabled person, what they are and are not responsible for. And they said, you can only have an interpreter. And it's like, no, there are, there's a range of accessibility tools that we can use for accommodations. And so the point of this is that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And as I educated them and they were able to find what accommodations would work, the key was that the ADA is a benefit to them and a tool that they should definitely be familiar with.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and actually speaking of knowledge, right? What are some of your ideas that would, how does that go? Work harder, not smarter, right? Not work smarter, not then harder. Work harder, not smarter. What are some of your ideas regarding that? In regards to accommodations and technology and everything that we've been discussing so far.
Right. Well, don't be afraid. If you are aware of some software out there that would make you more productive in your job, whether it's, speech to text or some other type of software that would help you do your job, don't be afraid to ask for it. If you need a volume control on your phone, or you need a left-sided headset instead of a right-sided headset, or whatever the case may be, there probably is some technology out there that would enable you to do your job. If not just enable you to do your job, enable you to do your job better. And so to the extent that you're aware that that's out there, I wouldn't hesitate to ask for it, but you just have to understand that that's part of the interactive process. Just because you ask for it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. But if you don't ask for it, you definitely won't. So, but I don't really know any other way to respond to that question. Generally, the ADA requires the employer to be responsive and engaged with their employees, but they don't require them to kind of read their employees' minds. And I think the employee is generally in the best position to know what accommodations they need.
Give the deaf person the remote, and the deaf person can set the captions on themselves, right? You have many hearing people who are sitting there trying to mess with the remote. How can we do it? And the deaf person says, just give it to me, I'll do it for you, let's make it easy, right? But you're right, it's really important to have that communication with each individual. Yeah. So how would you then convince a business that you actually want them to make those changes and provide those accommodations? How would you convince them? If the business says you just have to provide some efforts, even a small effort on your part, how can you convince them to do so?
Well, again, I think sharing those technical assistance materials that you can get from the Department of Justice and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission are definitely going to make them aware that there's not only is it the law, but there's potential negative repercussions to them if they don't. And this kind of goes hand in hand with what I tell people, say, like you run into that restaurant, I do a lot of talks with people with mobility impairments, a lot of workshops with them on self-advocacy and what are the tools in their toolbox other than just going and running out and filing a lawsuit. I'm certainly happy to do that if that's what it's come to. But in many cases, they know, hey, the door swings into the bathroom and I can't roll into my wheelchair and then close the door. So whoever built this, everything inside it is perfect and ADA compliant, except that I have to go to the bathroom with the door open. So whoever installed the door did it backwards. It needs to swing out, not in. It's a simple fix. But if you just tell the manager, hey, the door's on backwards, they're not going to know how to fix it. They're not going to know that it's a big deal. So when you're dealing with a business, whether it's one you work for or otherwise, you need to be business-like. And that's what I always tell them is, do it in writing, be professional. Say, write your human resources director and tell them what accommodation it is that you want. Do it in writing. And if you get a blank stares back, provide the technical assistance materials so that they see that, you're educated and you know what your rights are. But I think that when you make these requests and you use keywords like accommodation and disability and the ADA, that's gonna set off a lot of bells with the employer. And again, you want to do it not in a confrontational way, but in an educational way. And in a, hey, this will help me help you. This will help me be more productive for you. This will allow me to be a better employee. And if you go about it in that way and with that spirit, I think you're likely to get better results. But I think it's important that you do it in writing in a way that's documented so that if ultimately it's denied or just ignored, then you can take it to the next step and file a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I mean, that's the way that you enforce it.
Let's say during the first accessibility request, the first request that's submitted for accommodation, and that is denied. What would be the next course of action, or what would you recommend that someone do if they were denied on their first request? What's their next step?
Yeah, is to follow it up. It depends on the denial, right? So, for example, one of the last ADA cases that I resolved was for a fellow who had hand and foot deformities, and he had worked as a janitor and was able to do his job just great. They started to have a slowdown of work in this plant that he worked at, and the employer came to him, his supervisor came to him and said, hey, you know what, we don't really need a full-time janitor anymore. We're going to make that a part-time position. And his response was, well, I'll have to go find another job. I can't live off of part-time work. I need full-time work. So the employer said, okay, well, I can transfer you to this other division, and you'll have to operate this forklift. And he did use the forklift on occasion as a janitor because to move lots of boxes, but he was mainly getting into it 2 or 3 times a week. He would move trash with a forklift if he just had a lot of it. But it caused him pain when he became a forklift operator. It caused him great pain to get in and out of the forklift repeatedly, day after day, many times each day. His hands and feet were just killing him because he basically had to climb in and out of it and use his body in ways that didn't suit what were in essence birth defects. And so he complained and said, hey, I can't do this anymore. You got to find something else for me to do. There's really no accommodation that you could give me that would enable me to do the forklift job. So I want to go back, even if I have to be a part-time janitor, I'll see how long I can make that work. Maybe I can find a part-time job. And the employer's response was not, you're fired because you can't do the essential functions of the job and we have no other job for you. That probably would have been a response that they'd have gotten away with because he said he couldn't do it. But their response was either do this job or find another. And the way that they said it to him was an ultimatum: either do it or go find another job. There was no wiggle room to try and discuss what else can we do to help you to be a better employee or to keep your job. So that's what I mean by the interactive process. And now I've forgotten the question in telling that story. I don't know if I've answered the question you asked.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I just want to check in again. And also if Beth or Alex want to add anything off the book. You guys have provided extra comments and tips that have been so awesome so far. I just want to see if there's anything else.
No, just I guess a tip again, to emphasize is knowledge is power, as I highlighted before. Be familiar with accommodations that are out there and which ones apply to the companies and which ones apply to the deaf worker. So basically that's it. Yeah.
And you can always reach out to your local VR agency as well, your local rehab agency, if you need assistance filling out applications or what have you. There are many associations and agencies out there who are online and who are there to help you. There are different resources and an employment department. They can help you with your resume. There are lots and lots of resources out there, and you can find what you need to help you become successful.
Well, I want to offer, if anyone wants to stay after, if they have a very specific question or if they want to ask it in American Sign Language, we will stay a few minutes afterwards as well, so you don't have to ask it now. Thank you so much, Alex, Ed, Beth, for sharing your time tonight. This wouldn't be the same without you guys, so we really appreciate it. And everyone that joined us tonight, just so you know, we have recorded the session tonight. It will be available later on our website once we are able to put it all together and get the transcript on there. And if you or someone that you're working with needs to file a complaint, you're of course welcome to contact us for advocacy or contact Ed for questions or to see if there's a need for litigation. But we're also going to post in the chat, there it is, how you can file with the EEOC on your own, or we can even advocate with you and file with you. There also is an EEOC video phone number that I saw online. I don't know if that's video phone to video phone. It wasn't clear on the website, but it made it apparent that that was the video phone number. So check it out and see, but it might just be somewhere where they're directing deaf callers. I'm not sure. And again, you can contact us. We added our email addresses at the bottom. Also, there's been some great resources out there that I personally have recently come across. Trey Gordon, he's the other co-founder. Him and I are taking ADA courses at the moment. We're looking to get our ADA certification so that we can be coordinators, or we can have that certification so that people know that we've done the training. And on the way to all of that, we have come across some resources ourselves and also some really cool information. There's a lot of free classes out there. And so we've been able to gather a few resources for you. And so we're also going to post that in the chat. So if later on you are on the business side or on, the side that needs advocating or needs to know more about your rights, we have a few resources there. We'll also email that out to everyone who attended tonight so that you have that on your fingertips as well. And then of course, visit our website. Again, we've put a lot of investment into making sure that we can improve accessibility and be that model on our website. And we want to show that off with all of the deaf community individuals that have come on board, and we've hired to record some content on there. It's been a really awesome year to do those projects. And if you have a chance to take our survey, it's just to know how we can do this better next time. Every once in a while, we're just trying to fix a little bit of, how we set up the accommodations or, whatever it might be, things that we're missing on this end. So please fill out that survey if you have a chance. And again, we have a couple more sessions coming up. We're here the first Wednesday of every month until June. And Trey will be on the call next month with Ed and I. And yeah, we'll stick around for a few minutes just in case anybody has other questions. But thank you all for coming tonight.